All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the second virtual open house for the Easy Street Flood Mitigation Project. Before we begin, are there any boards that need to call a meeting to order? If so, unmute yourself. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I think we're all pretty familiar with using Zoom, but in case you're not, please keep yourself muted during the presentation. You'll be able to unmute yourself during the breakout sessions. If you don't want to have your video on, please click the video button at the bottom of your screen to shut it off. And if you have questions or comments, feel free to use the chat function, which is also on the bottom of the screen, and it will go directly to the project team. Next slide. Okay, Leo, I'll pass it over to you.
Very well. We also have interpretation services. If you want to listen to this meeting in English, and you don't have to do absolutely anything, you just enjoy. And para los que quieren escuchar esto en español, tenemos la opción de interpretación. Van a ver abajo un globo que dice interpretación. Entonces, cuando se comience, se le van a dar clic ahí, les va a preguntar el idioma que quieren escucharlo, van a poner español y siguen las instrucciones y ahí solamente van a escuchar mi voz.
Okay, next slide. So this meeting is being recorded. The breakout sessions will not be recorded, but if you do not want to be recorded yourself, please shut off your video feature and mute yourself. Next slide. Okay, so tonight we will be talking about the Easy Street Flood Mitigation Project, which the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee identified as the highest priority project in the town's coastal resilience plan due to its criticality and high risk to flooding. This portion of the project is graciously funded by a coastal zone management grant for a little under $500,000 to bring a preferred design to 30%. This is the first structural coastal resilience plan recommendation being implemented. Tonight, we're going to introduce you to 3 different design options to mitigate flood risk today and into the future. The overall goal of the project is to reduce certain flooding today and daily high tide flooding in the future, but it will not reduce all flood risk into the future with sea level rise. During certain storm events, there may still be water on the road. No matter which design option is chosen, it's going to be a major undertaking, large scale, and it's going to require an appetite for transformation. We look forward to your open minds and feedback so that access to the Steamship Authority and our downtown can be preserved. Then we're going to do some breakout rooms for about 10 minutes where we can dive deeper into the design options and have an opportunity for you all to ask questions. There'll be a brief reporting back on key themes and topics from the breakout rooms, and then next steps in the project. This should all take about an hour. It might run over a little bit, and if so, if you need to leave, feel free to do so. Next slide. So we're going to be using Slido, which is an interactive app, and it will be more engaging than us just giving you a presentation. So it's very easy. What you're going to do is you're going to take your iPhone or your smartphone. You're going to open the camera app, which I'm doing right now. You're going to put it up to the screen and hit the link that comes up, and that will bring you directly to the Slido that we're using. Alternatively, if you're on a desktop or an iPad, you can join at slido.com and enter 1903175 in the blue box on the top of the web page. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to try it out right now. So, which best describes your relationship to Nantucket? Are you a resident? Are you a property owner, a business owner? Do you work on Nantucket, or do you just come here and visit? So at this time, again, open your camera for the QR code or enter it in www.slido.com. That link is also in the chat if you just want to click that. So it looks like most people are residents, but half of them are property owners and some are just here for vacation. Great. All right, let's go to the next question. Okay, so what is your favorite waterfront place on Nantucket? Easy Street, I like it. Matticat, Eel Point, Old North Wharf, Old North, two people from Old North Wharf, Co 2, Cascada Pond, Cisco Brewers, Cathcart Road, Co 2, Old North Wharf. All right, sounds good. So let's continue on. All right, so the project team is made up of town staff and Arcadis. The pictures that you see on the screen tonight are here and are going to help facilitate during the breakout sessions or helping with giving the presentation. Also, other town staff that are on the project team are Greg Tivnan, Chuck Larson, Holly Backus, and Florencia Rulo. The sub-consultants that we've been working with are Woods Hole Group, One Architecture, and Childs Engineering. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Trevor from Arcadis.
All right, thank you, Leah, and thank you everyone for being here today. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of background and context on the project that we are working on, the Easy Street Flood Mitigation Project. For anyone who attended the open house that we held in August in person at the Whaling Museum, some of this may be a refresher for you, so bear with us while we walk through some of the background information for the project. So the project area includes Easy Street and Broad Street, extending from South Beach Street in the north to Still Dock in the south. The area is among the lowest lying portions of the waterfront in downtown Nantucket and includes places like the Nantucket Whaling Museum, the Dreamland Theater, the Easy Street Park, and some of the critical access ways to Steamboat Wharf. The project has several interrelated goals. These include, first and foremost, developing a feasible project to mitigate stormwater and coastal flood risk along Easy Street. As you can see in the images shown here, captured by Leah and other neighbors to the project area, mitigating the risk that flooding currently poses to the project area is the primary outcome that this project seeks to provide. And in doing so, and through that process, we're also seeking to do a couple of other things. Firstly, as evidenced through this meeting tonight, we're looking to inclusively engage the Nantucket community and a variety of stakeholders island-wide in the design development process. And then as part of the actual design itself, we are seeking co-benefits as part of the design, elements of the design that help improve access, enhance mobility, and provide environmental improvements to the area and to Nantucket overall. So that being said, our project goals are still open for discussion, and we're interested in which goals are the highest priority for you. So this is our next Slido activity. The question is for you to select the 3 priority goals for the project area in downtown Nantucket. And I'll read these. There's both English and Spanish translation here. So just to make clear, the first option here is to reduce flood risk to places critical to Nantucket's long-time vitality, including cultural, community, and transportation assets. Second is the enhancement of natural ecosystems. Third is the development of feasible, adaptable, maintainable, and permittable solutions, so solutions that can be built most efficiently and quickly. To create public, universally accessible waterfront experiences for people. To maintain the historic character of downtown Nantucket. To engage and educate community members about climate risks and the ways that the community can adapt to climate change. And then finally, they're bouncing around here, to enhance multimodal transportation infrastructure that's critical to mobility and safety. We'll pause here for a minute so folks have a chance to vote on their priorities for the project area. All right. Looks like reduction of flood risk, which is the primary goal that we've been working towards, is the highest priority. But still some emphasis on the maintenance of historic character in downtown Nantucket, which is something we've certainly heard a lot through our outreach and engagement thus far. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So the project kicked off in early 2024, and it has involved several tasks. The first task one, was an existing conditions and flood risk analysis. Then building on that, task two was an alternatives development and feasibility assessment process. And then task four, which is what we're currently involved in, is the design development. Stakeholder engagement, which is shown here as task three, the kind of wavy line in the background, has been interwoven throughout the process through a variety of engagement activities, including small group meetings, meetings with property abutters, briefings to the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee and Select Board, and then public open houses like tonight. And as Leah mentioned at the outset, the foundation for this project was the Coastal Resilience Plan, which was released in 2021. The Easy Street Flood Mitigation project was identified by the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee as the highest priority project for near-term implementation. This work, the work that we're currently involved in along Easy Street, along with the nearby Francis Street Beach effort, which is led by the town and the land bank, also shown on this map, covers the initial phases of the near-term flood protection strategy for downtown that was recommended by the CRP. That recommendation, it's worth noting, was developed based on over a year worth of outreach and assessment and engagement with the Nantucket community that took place from 2020 to 2021. I also want to note that we're going to be covering a lot tonight, and there's a lot more that we're not able to get to, but fortunately there are a couple of reports that have been issued by our project team earlier in the process through task one and task two. These reports are available on the town's website, which is shown here, nantucket-ma-gov/Easy Street. And this includes the existing conditions and flood risk report, and then our concept design and feasibility assessment report. There's just a lot more detail here that you can look into if you have an interest. And as mentioned and shown and probably experienced by many on this call, flood risk is the primary driver for this project. The map on here on this slide shows the projected extents of daily tidal flooding in the future with projected sea level rise. The sea level rise projections that we're using for this study and that were used to create this map are based on the high scenario that have been adopted by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The high scenario has a very low chance of being exceeded based on our current science and given the uncertainty that is involved in all climate projections. But given that how critical this area is to Nantucket's long-term resilience, this is the appropriate type of planning scenario to use for this type of planning and design project. In undertaking our flood risk assessment, we found a few things. Firstly is that sea level rise will contribute to more frequent sunny day flooding caused by monthly and daily high tides as soon as 2030. That frequency of flooding will increase through 2050 and 2070 and beyond. In addition to very frequent flooding from high tides, there is also a adjacent or associated risk of coming from storm surge that can cause damage to the downtown core of Nantucket. And our assessment found that there's a total of over $1 billion of total risk within this project area and adjacent areas from flooding through 2070. Our initial work also looked at 4 concept alternatives that are shown here. And these alternatives really looked at how to create a comprehensive line of protection located along the waterfront in the project area. These initial alternatives primarily looked at how we can increase the height and extent of the bulkhead that exists there today, and how to tie that bulkhead into high ground to prevent flanking of floodwaters into the project area. But as you'll see later, the alternatives we'll discuss today help refine these 4 alternatives and then also add on an additional exploration of a road raising option. And our revised alternatives, including the road raising option, were based on feedback from our first open house, which we held in August of 2024. Just to touch on a couple of things that we heard from the public during that engagement. Firstly, there was broad support for addressing the flooding issues on Easy Street. There's a desire to incorporate nature-based solutions into the design to the degree practical and feasible. An interest in exploring a new alternative, as I just mentioned, that would include a raised Easy Street. And then concerns for not just the flooding from tidal conditions, but also stormwater flooding. So how are we managing flooding from rainfall in addition to the flooding that comes from Nantucket Harbor? So with that, the goals for this open house are to provide an update to the public for the project status since summer 2024, to present our revised alternatives, which is what we'll spend the bulk of our time on, and then to answer questions and have a discussion and collect feedback from the Nantucket community on those revised alternatives. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Bill to talk a little bit about stormwater management.
Great, thank you, Trevor. Of course, there's really three environmental aspects that are contributing to flooding or have potential to contribute to flooding in this area. Certainly sea level rise, stormwater, and groundwater. Future, as sea level rises, groundwater has the potential to rise as well. Here we'll focus on stormwater. Easy Street is at the right-hand side of this figure, and the blue line represents the watershed. Essentially, any rain that falls in this blue line will make its way eventually down to Easy Street. What we know about this area is that it's highly impervious, it's very dense, there's very little green space, and it's very steep. So that rainwater gets down to Easy Street very quickly. As we're looking at stormwater mitigation options, next slide, please. We're really focusing on ways to slow down stormwater, slow down the rainwater from making it to Easy Street. And that could involve, implementation of green infrastructure up in the upper reaches of the watershed. We've also been evaluating, is there a potential to divert some of the watershed to a different location, a nearby wetland, or potentially a different outfall? When dealing with stormwater, there's also some advantages to being able to create some level of storage, particularly downtown here, where when tides are high, the infrastructure can't release the stormwater, hence things kind of back up. If there's a way to potentially hold and release in low tide, that's also advantageous. But ultimately, there'll likely be a means or a need for some level of pumping down there to essentially pump stormwater out against those high tides as we move into the future. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. So we're going to move it forward through our alternatives, but really what you're going to hear today is discussion about two elevations. One of them is elevation 8. And what elevation 8 is, it's offering a protection level against daily high tide flooding, predicted daily high tide flooding out to 2070. In elevation 8 is really representing about a 5.5-foot difference between existing grade today and where the protection level needs to be in the future. Also, we're evaluating a adaptable flood elevation or level of protection of 6.5. And what that 6.5 looks like, it's essentially 4 feet above the lowest point Easy Street today is the protection level. Coincidentally, it's approximately the level of the existing bulkhead today. However, the issue with the existing bulkhead today is that it was constructed in 3 different sections. In those sections, although they retain soil, they are not effectively watertight as there are seams between them. So as sea level rises, water can get in and come up. And I think we've seen that in areas of Easy Street Park. Move forward. So here are the three alternatives that have been advanced out of the open house. On the left-hand side is an adaptation of the concept of expanding the existing bulkhead and reinforcing that perimeter at the water's edge. The center option is the adaptable option of road raising. So essentially raising the road approximately 4 feet above its lowest point, and then potential to go to a higher elevation in the future. And then the far right option is to tackle the highest or offer that highest road raising option now, which would be 5.5 feet above the lowest point in Easy Street, and thereby protecting against that high tide in 2070, as well as storms between now and then, of course. Next slide, please. So as we go through each individual option, we'll have a plan view such as this, and then we're going to show maybe 6 or 7 different 3D models, concept level, just to get a slightly different perspective from a slightly different angle. And then we'll have a brief interjection between where we can ask a few questions and receive some of your feedback. So here, just to explain this option, the flood protection barrier is between the Easy Street Basin and Easy Street. It runs from north to south and has tie-ins along Cambridge Street, as well as up along the tennis courts at the Nantucket Yacht Club. At either end, there is a slight road raising from almost a little bit larger speed bump, if you will, that offers that level of protection to prevent against floodwater from flanking from the north and floodwaters flanking from the south, trying to maintain that access and emergency egress to that downtown area and to Steamboat Wharf. Here also, we did talk a little bit about the needs for stormwater pumping. Certainly, we are evaluating different areas down here to potentially locate that. And it's a tight squeeze down here, so we are trying to be as creative as possible. Certainly, we have a leader there at 31 Easy Street, which may or may not be available for something like that this time. I think we could move to the overviews. So this is a 3D kind of from an airplane, if you will, looking slightly to the north. You can see in orange is the area of the flood protection barrier along water's edge, as well as tie-ins up Cambridge Street and all the way along to North Beach. Now, this just doesn't, this is representing a concept. It really does not offer, final finishes or anything of that sort to what the actual materials of construction would be. It's merely relaying concept of expanding that bulkhead up to elevation 8, which is 1.5 feet higher than the existing timbers that are out there today, just for a means of perspective, if you will. Each one of the road raising sections, one there on Easy Street at the tail end, at the southern end, and one at South Beach. We also have a road raising section as you enter onto Steamboat Wharf. However, that at this time, the Steamship Authority doesn't have concrete plans for what their future resilience mitigation is going to be. So we will adapt that area as they develop their plans as well. I think we could go to looking south. So here you can see the flood protection barrier is traversing outside of 29 Easy Street, which is there. In this particular area, maybe a little bit more sensitive from a permitting aspect, as 2090 Easy Street is constructed right essentially on the current level of protection, whereas this wall would need to be constructed slightly outside of it. So if there's a regulatory change there, that flood protection line may need to go inside or landward of 29 Easy. Here we've also identified certain levels of wetland or restoration along the areas, and that's still to be determined. Let's see for the pedestrian view. So the next couple of views offer more of the pedestrian view. Here we're at the corner of Easy and Broad Street. The figures are approximately 5.5 to 6 feet tall. And you can see in the distance that elevation of NAVD 8, which is 1.5 feet higher than the timber bulkhead that's out there today. As we travel, the next one, I believe, is heading south on Easy Street. So this is a 3D view of what the road raising would look like in this scenario, where we're attempting to protect against floodwaters flanking from the south. Here we will definitely need to have additional consideration for pedestrian access, as well as ADA access through this area. As you can start to see, there's a change in elevation between where the sidewalk is along the western sidewalk. We've got a slight retaining wall in the eastern sidewalk, which is going the same elevation as the road raising. Next slide. So this is looking at Broad Street, looking east towards Steamboat Wharf. Here we're really keeping the road surface elevations the same and offering that level of protection at the edge of Truck Alley or adjacent to the tennis courts there at Nantucket Yacht Club. You can see in the distance the slight incline as you head towards Steamboat Wharf. I think that's the last view of this option. Right. The next slide. Yep.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Bill. So with each of these alternatives, we're going to have interactive opportunity for folks on the call to provide their input. So there'll be 2 questions. The first is for you to offer in an open-ended way what it is that you like about this option, the bulkhead expansion and elevation. And then the next slide will have an opportunity for you to provide constructive feedback on things you might not like or things you'd like to see changed or added to the design. So we'll pause here and give folks a chance to type in. And this is the same Slido link and number that you used before. Simpler, we have somebody who's already aware of our 3 alternatives on the call. That's great. Simpler than alternatives 2 and 3. That's right. This, as folks will see, this option is less has less kind of conflicts with abutting private properties, and so may have a less need for long-term adaptation or elevation of structures. Though, as Bill will get to, there is groundwater to contend with.
Yeah, I was just thinking that this particular option really doesn't address groundwater. There is a potential that groundwater will increase as time goes on. And at that point, or hopefully ahead of that point, items will need to be elevated.
All right, give another second for the folks who are typing to get theirs in here. Yeah, I think it's fair to say this is the option that's a little bit less, results in a little bit less change to the fabric of the downtown as compared to options 2 and 3. All right, thank you. You guys can keep typing in here. We'll have a record of anything that's put in here. And then we'll also encourage further feedback in the breakouts a little bit later. So if anybody has anything else to add beyond what was typed on the last slide, just in terms of things that you would like to change about this option, pause here for a minute or two to allow people to type in any additional thoughts. Yeah, the note about needing more protection than this, I think I'll just highlight again, this is the first phase of a project that was contemplated through the Coastal Resilience Plan that looks at a much larger network of flood protection throughout the downtown. So it is indeed the case that, over time, this project will need to be expanded and built on. Yeah, so the note about the standing water 3 feet deep or up to 3 feet deep, you may be in the sort of lowest lying portion of Easy Street. So the depth of flooding is going to be highest, as you know, at the lowest lying portions. This consistent line of protection at the same elevation will keep that water from getting to those low lying portions and causing that flooding. All right, and great. So yeah, stormwater or rainwater, that's going to be part of the design solution. We'll need to manage water holistically. Groundwater is sort of another issue. It's a larger kind of regional challenge that we can speak to more in the breakouts. All right. I think we'll move on just in the interest of time, more alternatives. But thank you all for your input. We'll have more opportunities like this.
So this is the adapted road raising option. And what this is proposing to do was be to raise Easy Street and Broad Street to an elevation of 6.5, which is approximately 4 feet higher than the lowest point of Easy Street, which is the lowest point is down around Easy Street Park. With the potential to adapt this to a higher elevation in the future to offer that level of protection consistent with the Coastal Resilient Plan. Here you will have certain aspects of the flood protection barrier being built into the roadway and essentially following along the roadway. This offers a smoother transition to Steamboat Wharf from a access and egress standpoint. However, it does create, I want to say, almost localized small basins where you've got raised road around each block. And in those areas, certainly stormwater will have to be collected and removed properly and potentially pumped out of those areas, in addition to any level of holistic pumping that would be required there. At this time, certainly there's no specific regulations to raise the structures in those areas, other than if there's a planned significant upgrade that the private residence is planning on their structure. As we move through this alternative, you can see that there's tie-ins as far back as Still Dock. There's an additional transition to South Beach, as Trevor was just at, and those areas are to prevent against flanking from the north and flanking from the south from floodwaters and high sea level rise, if you will. I think we could transition to an overall view. Here, you don't get too much of a perspective other than the area that is intended to be raised, which would be all along Easy Street and turning to Broad, keeping Truck Alley essentially at its same elevation, but creating that level of protection down that center median in Broad Street. We'll go to the southern looking view. Here you can follow the same concept level of the flood protection barrier line being drawn in orange, if you will, so it's easy to see, traversing underneath that access to Steamboat Wharf, and then again as it moves southern down the street. One of the as we move to the next couple of slides, you'll start to see the real difference from a perspective of being able to walk in that area and the delta difference between existing structures and potentially a raised road here that's indicating about 3-foot differential at that location. Here, just keeping in mind this is a concept level. There will need to be some level of safety protection between an elevated road and pedestrian travel. Here it's represented as this gray barrier that is by no means any sort of finished material. However, there will need to be a safe barrier between any particular pedestrian travel and vehicular travel. Let's see, I think we could go to the next slide here. Here I'm traveling a bit further south down Easy Street, heading more towards Old North Wharf. You can see the delta difference between the sidewalk and the elevated structure. This here is proposing to keep that roadway open as long as possible, providing access and emergency egress to Steamboat Wharf in the downtown. Certainly pedestrian travel as well as ADA access will need to be changed and modified in this area, in addition to any level of small basins that have a potential to collect water at the bottom of here. This will have to be addressed by means of additional infrastructure and potentially pumping. I think we go to the next one, which is along Broad Street. Here is a little bit challenging as Broad Street would be elevated and the businesses are not elevated in this view. You need a transition between the sidewalk or the edge of road and the structures themselves. Here we've concept put a little bit wider sidewalk here with the adaptation of putting some level of green infrastructure or some means of stormwater infrastructure in that area to ensure that rainwater does not travel towards the buildings but travels away from buildings. And that definitely will have certainly a lot of consideration as we move forward. I think we could probably open for questions.
Yes. So same questions and opportunities for feedback as with alternative one. But we would request any input on what you like about the adaptable road racing to 6.5. Not to steal Bill's thunder, but the next alternative, we'll look at a road raising strategy to 8 feet and have the 88. So rather than adaptable, kind of doing it all at once. So you might have that in mind as you think about this one. And then we'll have another slide for you to provide any anything you don't like or would change about this alternative. A more long-term solution, that's interesting feedback. So thinking about it as maybe an add-on, a future add-on to an initial phase. Give folks 30 seconds or so to get their comments typed in here. Yeah, I'd say that one of the key things of the road raising is that it does bring the right of way out of near-term impacts from groundwater. So that does provide an additional component or dimension of protection as compared to alternative one, as Bill mentioned. Yeah, it is a big change. Absolutely. And yeah, the access, there would be impacts to adjacent private parcels that would need to be studied and addressed as part of the implementation of any road raising solution. That is certainly the case. All right, give it another just a second here. Heading in the right direction, but still more is needed. Yeah, and as I just mentioned, access to adjacent properties is one of the biggest considerations and technical challenges associated with this option. All right, I'll pause here for maybe, I think we got a lot of feedback on both sides of the perspective on the first slide here, but if there's anything else folks would like to add on changes they'd like to see as part of this option, please feel free to type it here. Yeah, great comment about the park. I think, yeah, there's certainly opportunities to think about how to integrate the Easy Street Park with really any of the alternatives, but with this alternative in particular. Yeah. All right. A few more seconds here and then we'll move on just in the interest of time, but just know that we have, you know, what you type in here, we will have a record of and be able to incorporate into our assessment. All right, Bill, why don't I hand it back here to you for the
Yeah, that'd be great. This is a lot of great feedback. This is tackling a road raising concept all at once. Again, this is the goal of preventing daily high tide flooding out to 2070, raising to an elevation of 8, which is essentially 5.5 feet taller than the lowest lying point on Easy Street. Same area, same boundaries. The slopes get a little bit longer as you're a little bit higher to transition back down to existing grade along Oak Street and South Beach Street and the other side streets as well. Same issues with creating localized pockets that need to be addressed from a stormwater perspective. This does offer the most protection from a groundwater perspective as well as from sea level rise. It does not need adaptation, as does the elevation 6.5 foot, elevation 6.5 option does. The access through the area becomes a little bit more challenging. I mean, ADA ramps would take a little bit higher, a little bit more distance to navigate across the roadway. Pedestrian access is a little bit different with a few more steps to go to that slightly higher elevation from a walking surface along Easy Street Park. We could go through the elevation 3D views. Not so sure you'll see a tremendous difference in this view from the last alternative, since it's at a fairly great distance. This is the same general line of protection following the orange line right along Easy Street, and then under Steamboat Wharf along the center of Broad or adjacent to Truck Alley, and keeping those raised elevations along South Beach and down by Cambridge Street to prevent flanking. Go to the next view, which is looking south. Slightly different perspective, but similar line. Here you've got a little bit, a few more steps to get down to Easy Street Park. we will have certainly a little bit more longer runs to get elevation and pedestrian travel over, particularly ADA access. And I think we could probably look at that pedestrian level here. We're in this location, we're showing a delta of about 4.5 feet. You can see that perspective of the figures in the view, roughly 5.5, 6 feet tall. In all of those little areas, just a little bit higher than the previous version, or 1.5 feet higher, actually. And this is the intersection of Easy Street and Broad Street. And as we navigate a little bit southern on Easy Street, you can see that elevation. I think we're about 4.5 feet there. And again, there would be that needed level of safety between any raised road and any pedestrian. Here we've got a lower sidewalk on the west side and a higher sidewalk matching the roadway elevation on the east side. I think we could travel to Broad Street. Very similar concerns with stormwater in this area. Any raised road adjacent to lower buildings will need special consideration to make sure that any level of rainwater does not head towards the structures. So this is an area of particular importance where you have a lot of pedestrian travel, and the implementation of some level of green infrastructure and additional infrastructure in this area from a drainage perspective is likely required. So I think we could probably get a few comments on this option as well.
Yeah. So same deal, same questions, opportunity for input, both positive and constructive in terms of things we should change or things you don't like about the options. Or this option, I should say. And while folks are typing, I'll just note, I think we'll likely run 10 to 15 minutes long this evening. So we do have the breakouts planned coming up in just a few minutes. So do hang around if you have questions for the project team and want to discuss anything further, but we will run a few minutes long. Yeah, that's a good point about groundwater, neither of these, really none of these alternatives address groundwater for private properties. I think it's important to note that, these alternatives are really focused on the public rights of way or on publicly owned infrastructure to the greatest extent possible. And just note that, neither of the road raising options really preclude the potential for future elevation of adjacent structures to a new grade in the future. Yeah, access is, as noted with the previous alternative, certainly a big challenge.
As there are several driveways along that side as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, pumping will be required likely for any of these options, and the stormwater would need to be sent elsewhere. All right, thank everybody for their input. I'll just give a quick opportunity for folks to provide this. Any further feedback on option 3? And then just we'll have an opportunity in a moment to provide your kind of ranking or prioritization of these 3 alternatives between the 3 of them. delete. All right. Give a second for folks to finish up their typing here, and then we'll move on. All right, Bill, I think going back to you with this next slide.
Sure. Really, this is a alternatives comparison, if you will, but just keep in mind that these are proposing to offer that same level of protection from a sea level rise and stormwater. Certainly, the option on the left does not specifically address groundwater at this time, whereas the adaptable center option does raise the road and addresses groundwater, and moving up even higher also does as well. Just keeping in mind again that the ultimate goal here is to be consistent with that coastal resilience plan and get to that level of protection to protect against daily high tide flooding in 2070. And how we get there is really the trick of it. Go to the next slide.
With that, we're going to now walk through, go through each of the options, and you'll have an opportunity to scale on a scale of 1 being least and 5 being most, how appealing each alternative is to you. We're not voting on any outcome here, but we're trying to get an indication of where people are and sort of their preferences and prioritization of these options. So you'll see in a moment that you'll have a chance to vote for each of these. So I'll walk through them individually. And then pause for folks to provide their preferences. So first is the first alternative that Bill presented, the bulkhead expansion and elevation option. So again, with this one, you'll see on the Slido interface the opportunity to rank it 1 to 5. It's okay if you're somewhere in the middle. If you don't love any of them, you can certainly give us an indication that it's somewhere between 1 and 5. We've got 11 votes in. Can we get any more? Going once, going twice. Ah, there we go, 12, excellent. All right, so, and 13, great. All right, it looks like we've got a kind of a split between mid-pack ranking of 3 and a ranking of least appealing for this option. So now we're going to move to option 2. This is the adaptable road raising to 6.5 feet, sort of the near-term option with adaptability in the future to a higher elevation. And same process. 1 is least appealing and 5 is most appealing to you. See if we can get the same number of votes. 13, I think we had. All right. Great, 13. Okay, so it's certainly looking like a little bit more prioritization and preference for this option here as compared to option 1. So let's see where we go with the final option, which is the road raising to 8 feet and at the 88. Great. A few more can we get in? We can get 13 for each of them. That's great. Maybe not. But that's okay. So thank you everybody for recording your preferences. Again, not voting on, which option we're moving forward with, but just providing a more data points for us to consider as we're thinking through the public's perspectives on these 3 options.
Very good. Just a quick indication or display of what some of the permits may be. It's certainly going to be a extensive permitting process. I do not propose to go through all of these permits, but each one of these regulatory agencies will have a comment and potential impact on the outcome on the project. Just at this point in time, we've done a preliminary assessment of what permits may be required. And as we move forward through the next phase of heading into a little bit more detailed design of selected alternative, discussions will continue with these permitting agencies and eventually filing for all these permits here. Next slide.
All right, so with that, we're gonna now launch into small group discussions. So what's gonna happen is you've already been assigned to a breakout room by a member of our team here. In a moment, we'll open the breakout rooms and it will ask you to join a breakout room, or if you don't click the button, you'll be automatically sent to that breakout room. In that room will be a member of the Arcadis project team and a member of town staff. And we're not going to be representing the options or walking through new material. We're really just hoping to help answer questions that you may have or may have arisen during this presentation and clarify anything that may be unclear. We want to have a positive and constructive conversation. So hopefully you bring that attitude and perspective to the conversation. Okay, so with that, Michelle is going to launch the breakout rooms. If you are in the Spanish interpretation channel, you are going to stay right here. You're not going to do anything. And some other folks are not going to do anything either. This main Zoom room, if you will be one of our breakouts. So we're just going to quickly go around the Arcadis team members. We'll just share a quick some major themes or questions that came out of the breakouts. In our breakout, we focused on a couple of different topics. The first was really around the issue of groundwater and what level of pumping would be necessary to manage groundwater, not just along the project alignment itself, but for some of the interior properties. We had a brief discussion about the sort of how option 2, the adaptable road raising, could be adapted in the future and what that might look like. And then some questions about 29 Easy Street and how the different lines of protection relate to that residential property. The outcome or this sort of upshot being that alternative 1 provides an option that protects or includes 29 Easy Street, whereas the road raising options have that structure kind of self-protected outside of the line of protection.
Trevor, we also spoke a bit about groundwater and really identifying the difference between, the bulkhead option as well as road raising, and road raising having that advantage of essentially elevating out of any potential future groundwater elevation. We also had a good discussion about how this project fits into the bigger plan of protection along the waterfront, and how the connection between Easy Street and Francis Street, and how there's a lot of privately owned wharfs between here and there, and folks are building things at maybe slightly different protection levels. So a lot of good points, a lot of good consideration on how this fits into the bigger plan.
In our group, I think we had a similar discussion around the larger plan and how private property resilience measures may fit in as downtown mitigation measures are implemented. We talked a little bit about stormwater and, rainstorm runoff, storage possibilities, and also, potential impacts to, the areas just outside of the project area. So really good discussion around those things.
Okay, so we've got 2 more slides. Thank you for sticking with us. This is just to show the next steps of the project and resilience projects in general. So we are at the preliminary design phase. By June of 2025, our CZM grant is up, so we will have a preferred alternative to them by then. Once we compile all of this great feedback from the community, the town staff will make a recommendation as far as which alternative to move to that 30% design, and the select board will vote on that. At this year's town meeting, we also have a capital appropriation request to move the preferred alternative to final design and permitting. And then once I'll also be reapplying for a CZM grant to offset those costs. So once you have final design and permitting, then you can go to construction. Of course, you need to find funding for construction as well. And then for resilience projects, there's always operations and maintenance costs as well. Throughout this whole process, stakeholders and the community are engaged. Next step, next slide. Okay, so this is going to be recorded. It's going to be put on the project website, which this QR code goes directly to it. There will be a feedback form. So essentially the same questions that you answered tonight, that form will be in that form. You can also add more questions or comments as well. It'll be both in English and Spanish. It'll be open for a week, so it'll close next Tuesday on March 25th at 8 p.m. And if you have any other questions or comments or want to learn more about the project, please reach out to me. My email is lhill@nantucket-ma.gov. So thank you all for participating tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And Trevor, you can stop the recording.
Thank you.